Signal Sciences is the industry's first web protection platform that works in any cloud, any container, any platform as a service, and any modern application architecture. The Signal Sciences web protection platform can be deployed in next-generation WAF, RASP, or reverse proxy modes, giving customers ultimate flexibility and coverage. Protect your web applications with Signal Sciences web protection platform. Signal Sciences, protecting applications, connecting teams. For more information, check them out at signalsciences.com/PSW. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ASW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter.
Welcome back, everyone, to Application Security Weekly News for the week of July 8th, 2018. So interestingly, in the news, Google just patched a bunch of critical remote code execution bugs this past weekend. In fact, I think this was breaking news that I saw this morning, or possibly last night. Paul, I don't know if you caught this, but they had something like 44 patches issued for 11 critical vulnerabilities, some of which were remote code execution. This looked really bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's typical with Android. I mean, this is a much larger update in terms of the number of vulnerabilities that were fixed. It'd be interesting to see, like, I'm always curious, like, who's reporting them. Like, did something change that so many were reported? Did they launch a bug bounty program? Did they somehow incentivize people to look at it? Did they adjust their internal resources to look for bugs? Was there some kind of external pressure? Sales pressure, right? Like typically federal contracts, right, may prompt you to go look at your code, or may force you to go look at your code and make sure it's more secure. So I thought that was kind of interesting, as whenever I see, and this, I mean, you could almost chart this, right? Major operating systems or major software, how many in a given period of bugs are being disclosed, and like if that number shoots up, I just find it interesting to look at the cause for that.
Yeah, that's, it's interesting. In the bulletin that they released for July, they don't go into, exactly why they ended up having so many bugs. What was interesting to me, though, was some of them were framework-related vulnerabilities. A number of them were remote code execution vulnerabilities, including the sorts of things that you'd be able to basically maliciously compile certain things, send them over the air, and then suddenly you'd be able to get remote access or privileged access to the device. One, or in this case, they actually had two of them that said 24 vulnerabilities were tied to bugs found in the Qualcomm system components. So these might have even been contributed. So, 24 bugs contributed might have been by Qualcomm, right? Which, yeah. I don't know if they have a bug bounty program, but that could have been, people doing research on chipsets because of all the hype that we saw earlier this year. Let's also remember, we're getting awfully close to, besides Las Vegas, Black Hat, and DEF CON, which, by the way, usually all of the patches that are going to be discussed on the bugs that were found and talked about at those conferences are released right around now. So
many drivers, right, for fixing bugs. I mean, you like to think that they got really good with their processes. Maybe they implemented some new tool or solution, whatever that is, internally developed, open source or commercial or combination thereof, and started discovering and fixing more bugs at a faster pace. Of course, that's the optimist in me talking. I think most likely, Keith, it's probably related to some research that is likely going to come out at Black Hat, perhaps, or DEF CON.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea exactly. I don't have the skinny on exactly how these were found, other than to say that there's a lot of them. So if you can, go ahead and patch, but that's also kind of the sad trombones part about all this, right, is unless you have like a Google like Pixel or their Nexus phones, I'm willing to bet that you probably won't be able to patch for, I don't know, a month or more, depending on the provider.
Yeah,
so
could be several months. I use a Pixel, but in my house, I have a lot of Android devices.
Yeah,
which is interesting. Like I have an NVIDIA Shield, which is Android. It's actually a spin-off from Android TV, which I don't think Google is producing, but maybe licenses. I'm not sure about what's going on with the Android TV thing, but it's essentially Android, right? And there was just a huge update for all NVIDIA Shield devices, but I don't know if it covered this stuff, because that update's been pending for a couple of weeks, and I think I just finally got it on all three of my devices at home. And now this is new since I've uploaded that update was available. So I don't think it covers this stuff.
Yeah, well, here's hoping, and otherwise, I hope you've got a good firewall. We'll just put
Right?
it that way. So, also in the news, by the way, GitLab just pushed out a few patches for a number of different versions based on some persistent XSS in a few of their different features, as well as cross-site scripting in URL forms. So for releasing version 11.0.1, 10.8.5, and 10.7.6. So these look like they're all minor release versions to patch, multiple instances or multiple versions that are available. So a number of these looked like they were XSS related. In fact, Franz Rosen, who is a fairly well-known bug bounty hunter, seems to have reported this to GitLab, probably by way of their bug bounty program itself. But he's actually highlighted in the security bulletin as released by GitLab. So, yeah, definitely another situation where if you're running a version control system, you need to know about these sort of things because, by the way, you're going to want to go patch them, especially for things like cross-site scripting.
I don't think it's any secret why GitLab is experiencing some extra attention on the security front, right? Because the whole Microsoft buying GitHub thing and all those new people going over, I can imagine that it either garnered attention from people who are moving over, considering moving over, or just because it was in the news, bug bounty hunters were like, oh, that should be an interesting one to pick on. Like, hey, I forgot about GitLab,
Yeah. I mean, either way, you're right. I'm not surprised that they're getting more attention for one. As a side note, it was said that GitLab originally was on Azure for a while, and then when the whole acquisition happened, apparently they're now working to migrate over to Google Cloud Services. Is kind of what I'm hearing out on Twitter. So. Interesting how that all is taking place. Maybe this is, something where they're in the process of migrating. Maybe they're migrating old code and trying to get things back up and running, with some of the newer stuff that they're working on. And that's usually the way that development happens is you have like a blue-yellow pattern where blue is kind of, current, modern, cutting edge, and yellow is the last version that you were working on that in this case, maybe you're migrating people over to, or rather migrating people away from via your CDN. So needless to say, a number of patches came out for them. Definitely something that people should look at, especially because, again,
I don't think there's any fear of, Microsoft having some like taking out features or somehow impacting GitLab in any way. When I speak with people from Microsoft, they're very supportive. They're like, look, if you're using Azure, you're cool. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, as long as people are using Azure, Microsoft likes it. It doesn't seem to me like they're kind of picking and choosing, solutions there or impacting someone kind of in like a net neutrality kind of way. Like, oh, well, you're GitLab and we have GitHub, so therefore GitLab gets much less attention, less bandwidth or whatever. I don't think they're doing that. They're like, hey, if you're on Azure, great. It's awesome.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And it's funny. I actually speculated on Twitter that GitLab will eventually be purchased by Google as like a competitive thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
that could very much fuel their move to Google Cloud.
Yeah, I know, right? I still wait for it to be seen. Again, like I'm not. I think
that's a solid. I'll stand behind that. That's a solid prediction.
So eventually,
when it happens, if it happens, you credit Keith with that prediction. So mark this date down. Make a note.
Yes, July 9th, 2018.
4:19
publicly
p.m.
says, yeah, I'm not an investment professional. Do not necessarily choose stock purchases based on my recommendations. But needless to say, that would be interesting if it happened. Moving on, though, there was actually another breach, in this case of a little-known Florida company called Exactus in Palm Coast, Florida, which is a marketing and data aggregation company, which, lo and behold, seemed like it had a vulnerability that was publicly accessible to the internet, according to the researcher that disclosed it to them. So 340 million individual records on a public server released that included all sorts of different metrics, up to 400 personal characteristics about the individuals and the data they were collecting. We've just seen a slew of these sort of things. I'm wondering if they were on Amazon S3 by any chance and they just didn't secure their S3 bucket. Because it doesn't say exactly how the vulnerability came out, but man, we're just like one after another. Cambridge Analytica, this one, all sorts of other, privacy-related issues are starting to come to light, Paul. I feel like this is not the end of what we're going to see by any means.
No, I mean, and you can see it's kind of interesting based on your technical segment you did on Paul Security Weekly, if you were to say, hey, who else is collecting data and what assets do they own? And is there anything in there where, I mean, you could follow that same kind of train of thought that you did in your technical segment, Keith, and just apply it to companies that are collecting data and find and search for these easily discovered leaks, such as, an open S3 bucket. So, yeah, I think we're going to see more of it too.
And to that end as well, it makes you wonder, at what point these are going to become issues for GDPR regulation, right? Because if you have that many million records, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're all U.S. citizens, because they could be someone that's here temporarily from Europe, right? Mm-hmm. So it makes you wonder what will happen as GDPR starts to bear its teeth a little bit and becomes less of a thing that people should do based on compliance and more of a thing that people should do because they're coming after you financially. But yeah, this is the sort of thing that as soon as I saw this come through, I thought to myself, yikes. First of all, 400 personal characteristics, including such things as if you're a smoker, if you own a dog or cat, your religion, your personal interests. I mean, these are all the sorts of things that I imagine that they probably have a few answers to people's security questions in there without even really thinking about it. I don't know if this is just bad design or, to the extent of they were aggregating this information for financial institutions. That was, in fact, that was one of the things that we covered last week. It was a blog post by Daniel Miessler that you might have some interest in discussing, Paul, which is how financial institutions are able to use things like the operating system on your phone and other metrics to use artificial intelligence and determine your creditworthiness, which to this end, 400 characteristics about you, how you spend, what you spend on, et cetera, could certainly contribute to a good data set for training your algorithm on creditworthiness, which is, rife with problems if you think about it, or at least, morally it feels wrong. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about that, Paul, because that was something we covered last week.
No, I just think, if you were to listen to this podcast, for example, you could probably get a lot of the same data about Keith and I.
Right? Yeah, I know, right? NVIDIA Shield, Android,
yeah. Smoke cigars, right? Yeah.
Right. Has cats.
Yep.
Mikey's. They haven't showed up on the show as of yet, but I don't know. Maybe someday we'll have Cat Security Weekly.
There you go.
But in the meantime, it looks like Hamas is getting wise to people just not using secure applications or not caring about the applications that they're using. So in Bugs, Breaches, and More, story number 4, it came out that Hamas was basically putting malicious applications in the Google Play Store, which is surprising that they weren't caught, first of all, and then using, lo and behold, phishing campaigns to target Israeli soldiers in and around Palestinian territories, such that they were able to get things like access to their camera or their microphone or all of other sorts of things. Did you read any of this article, Paul? Because this was like one of those situations of it's first of all surprised me that they got it into the Google Play Store. And then secondly, it was just, straight up spear phishing, it felt like.
Well, now they say using the fake World Cup app, and I don't know if we covered it on this show. Certainly someone wrote into the show, and I read the article that basically said, based on the, they were using this app, and while the soccer game was going on, companies or the broadcasting companies would access the app, turn on the microphone, and if they heard the broadcast, would point that back to your location and go, oh, that's not a location that's supposed to be broadcasting the game, so therefore they're in violation. And now we see that Hamas is using this to spy on people as well, which kind of makes you wonder how rampant this is in terms of using fake apps to basically spy, not just on you, but what is happening in your surroundings.
Well, yeah, like why does my flashlight app require my camera access? Well, that makes sense. Why does it require access to all my photos or my microphone, right? It's those sorts of things that it's interesting to me that even though we provide more and more visibility to users on exactly what the application is actually having access to, I feel like we've got ourselves into this quagmire of next, done, install, and then start using the app and just totally fly right by all of these problem sets. So, yeah, to me, this was one of those stories of I was just surprised it made it into the Google Play Store. Clearly, they've got some work to do in terms of figuring out what sort of apps should have perhaps what sort of permissions
Yeah, I
associated
mean,
with it. But then again,
you can audit that on your own. I mean, I also believe there's apps that will audit that for you, but you can go in your Android settings and see every single app and what permissions that it has.
true,
Unless they're
that
using
is
some
true.
kind of exploit to say it really has these permissions, like you accepted it when you first, like you said, that next install, and then it somehow hides that when you go look at it. I can certainly see that being some type of exploit that either exists or could exist in the Android ecosystem. But as a user, you can look at that stuff.
I was actually reading something, and I don't know if it was related to Mac OS or what have you, but I was reading an article at one point last week that was talking about how it would give the permissions you would expect an application to have at time of installation, but then when you would go ahead and update it, oh, and you know what it was? I think it was Google Chrome extensions. It was kind of a big story last week that I don't have it covered on this show this week, but it was one of those things where you'd accept the permissions of the extension on installation, and then when they updated the extension,
Right.
you didn't get any new notifications on the changes that they made. So I don't know if that sort of thing exists in Android because I don't happen to use Android, but I think, as far as I recall, it will actually identify for you that you're now accepting the following updated permissions whenever you update an application. So, yeah. Either way, though, it's clearly human beings want to watch the World Cup, and they don't care that the applications that they're downloading happen to give them access to things, or they don't know the provenance of them. So
now, Keith, your story number 4 under "If you build it, they will come." We actually did an interview with the CEO of Domain Tools, and largely focused on this issue of, because of GDPR, the whois data could be considered personally identifiable information and therefore has to be protected. That level of privacy, of course, in this situation would, give birth to a lot of attackers and evil bad people that want to do bad things on the internet. Would give them some privacy, and this is the kind of debate, right? When we look at Tor, when we look at the blockchain technologies, and now in whois data, the more privacy we give people. That was Tim Chen, thank you, BSW number 83, thank you, Sam, was talking about this issue. The more privacy that we give people, the more opportunity we give for criminals to hide. And so this has come to the full forefront, of this debate between ICANN and the European, whatever it is in Europe. Excuse my ignorance for for not knowing what the governing standards and regulatory bodies are in Europe.
I believe it's the European Data Protection Bureau.
Thank you, European Data Protection Bureau. Basically, the European Data Protection Bureau is like, yeah, go pound sand. We're still, there has to be a level of privacy. Is their current ruling. Now they're, of course, still, I think, working on this, right? There's another 6 months or so before things become finalized, but this is dangerous, man. This again is that age-old debate between, privacy, anonymity, and criminals, especially as we talk about in the context of the internet, or cyber, if you will.
It makes me wonder how much of this is just like a kind of a cultural battle between two entities, right? Because ICANN is located in California. They're $100 million nonprofit organization, and lo and behold, they're in California. You wonder who they're getting their budget and donations from, right? The big Googles, Facebooks, Apples, Microsofts of the world. And so it makes me wonder, to some extent, if all of these things are being thrown out almost on principle, right? That the European organizations are simply saying, look, we can't trust you with anything that you're putting forward because of the entities that you are beholden to some degree. And as a result of that, we are just going to start throwing out anything that you put forward to us. This is actually the third time that they've gone ahead and brought this forward, as a number of different solutions that they're trying to bring forward. And the EDPB is basically saying pound sand. Which to me is both, terrible and at the same time kind of great for privacy. I don't know how to feel. I've got mixed feelings on
right.
this, Paul.
Me too. I'm right there with you, Keith. It's just you can't. It's tough for me to weigh in either direction, right? Which usually as commentators on podcasts like this, we want to weigh in one direction, but I don't know, man. This one is just a slippery slope. could go either way. I mean, sure, privacy is good, right? But then there are repercussions to that, and they're trying to sort it out. I don't know if we're going to come to a conclusion, that is positive or negative. I don't know. It's a sticky issue.
Yeah, it's one of those situations. In fact, I think they say it specifically in the article. To quote ICANN, it says that organizations would have to explicitly justify and document why it is necessary to retain personal data for a period of time. So basically, the EDPB is saying, look, we don't think that it's necessary to retain this data. You're saying that it is. I mean, if I'm being frank, for my own personal use, I don't find a lot of value in who is data, except when I'm going bug bounty hunting and I prove that the company actually owns it, right? Like I can see that it's registered under, Netgear, for example, or Tesla or what have you. But other than that, I think the only other real benefit that people actually get from this kind of data is when they're trying to do threat hunting, right? So
Yeah.
they're trying to track down malicious
Mm-hmm.
users or malicious campaigns that are taking place, and this is something that they are able to zero in on as a indicator of compromise, or at
Certainly.
least an indicator of a threat actor.
Well, and it's a
And
pretty. I mean, is if you go watch really any of our segments or webcasts with domain tools, it's a very powerful discovery tool to basically get ahead of attackers. To say, well, this domain's definitely malicious, and by the way, the person that registered it, they own all these other domains, and likely those are malicious too. So therefore, let's go block all those other domains. So having access to that data allows us for a very powerful tactic to be able to implement that level of threat intelligence inside of our networks, and it could potentially go away. We'll see.
yeah, it makes me wonder.
Now there
what
are other
we'll do
ways,
next.
and there are other ways to do that same level of tracking as well. It's a more complex issue. It's not just a black and white issue, but yeah, interesting.
Maybe they'll throw some blockchain at it, right?
Because blockchain solves everyone's problems, dude.
So I don't know, Paul, if you had any final thoughts. I actually did want to move on to story number one under the "If you build it, they will come" section, which I thought was hilarious. This is more of like the skateboarding dog story of the week. But in this case, it appears that companies are saying that they have AI technology, and then they're hiring effectively workers that they can pay a lower wage in different parts of the world to act as AI when responding to what should be an AI system. Did you catch any of this story, Paul? This is just hilarious.
I mean, this has been going on for a long time. We've talked with Distill networks, right? And we've all heard the stories in the past where you put up a CAPTCHA on your website, but you can go on the dark web and basically buy CAPTCHA bypass, which essentially is just sending it to some place in some, or it doesn't have to be another country, right? Sending it to a bunch of people that are figuring out the CAPTCHA and sending you back the result, and you get a large enough group of people, they can solve those CAPTCHAs in like 4 seconds or something like that. I mean, don't quote me on that, but that's essentially how it works, right? So this is just an extension of that. I'm saying I have AI in my product, and I'm just outsourcing it to, a bunch of people, actual humans.
And in some cases, people are saying, yeah, these humans that we're outsourcing into are training the AI. Wink, wink, nod, nod.
Sure.
But
that very well could be the case. But if you're not using any of that training and you're still just relying on humans, it's not artificial intelligence, right? It's actual human intelligence. So.
Right, which is arguably more powerful depending on what you're doing with it.
Sure.
But it's funny because at one point they quote, it was Gregory Koberger, CEO of README, that says, it's essentially prototyping the AI with human beings, which I don't call that prototyping. That's just human beings.
Yeah, it is, yeah. Yep.
So that was, when I read this, I was just like, really? Like, really? But I guess, some things are just too costly. Humans are in fact cheaper right now than AI. So we'll just pay the humans to do what we call AI. I don't know, man. It's just like, really? I just couldn't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there were, I did want to cover a couple of the learning and tools for this week. But
I want to hear about a couple from the learning and tools.
Sure. So a couple of things that came out of AppSec Europe last week that I thought was really awesome is the first is remediate the flag. So it's actually an entire, capture the flag environment where developers are basically taught how to find and then ultimately fix vulnerabilities inside of kind of this capture the flag environment, which I thought was incredible, right? Like this is the sort of idea that I've been promoting for a little while
Mm-hmm.
with the attack-driven development method of
Yep.
learning application security. Build it, break it, fix it. In this case, it's attack it, remediate it, confirm that it's remediated, and that's how you get your flag. Which, when it comes to training developers, the best way to do it is give them a broken app, help them learn how to hack it, because then guess what? They can do that in their own apps, and then teach them how to fix it. So suddenly they know actually how to do those processes. That was super cool in my mind. The other one, as a big fan of the application security verification standard put forward by OWASP, Daniel Cuthbert and the Santander security team built a simple web application that helps developers understand the different checks and balances inside of the ASVS as an installed application. So this is also something that I believe was released at OWASP AppSec Europe. But this was another pretty cool application with, by the way, a Docker build ready for you to go ahead and just pull it down and build it. So those are two things under learning and tools that I thought this week were definitely worth checking out that came out last week while you were away on vacation. Last thing, well, actually, we probably could fit a couple other things in here, but I don't know if did you get a chance, Paul, to see the commit strip for this week?
No, I haven't.
So this commit strip, I'm not going to spoil it too much for everyone, but it is called One Talk to Rule Them All, and it has the developer character and the sysadmin character at a conference that they've been begging to go to. And I think our readers will thoroughly appreciate the talk that they end up going to see, which is related to some of the things that we've actually talked about here on this podcast today. So go ahead and check that out. That's number 4 under food for thought. The last one, though, or last topic of discussion that I thought was interesting is number 1 under food for thought, which is an actual scientific study performed by the Royal Society's publishing, or it was published by the Royal Society, which I believe in this case is a British organization, on some studies around how open offices are actually killing collaboration. And what they did is they went ahead and studied use of things like chat rooms or email functionality or other such things inside of your organization, and how that changes as offices go to open concept. And what they found is, in this case, contrary to common belief, volume of face-to-face interactions decreased approximately 70% in the cases where you went to an open office or a more open office, as opposed to the cases where you actually had remote workers or situations where you had closed offices or more closed offices.
Or cubicles? Cubicles.
Yes, cubicle farms.
Yes.
So yeah, needless to say, it's funny because I think that there was recently some tweets by Swift on Security about open concept offices, and so when I saw this as an empirical study of slamming open concept offices, I said, yeah, I can pretty much agree with this, and that's why personally I enjoy working remotely, because it's my office, So
It's interesting.
anyhow.
There's always, and this I think really relates to application development and security, Keith. I've worked in a lot of different development environments and IT environments, and there's always a hot debate about, should it be an open office? Should it be a semi-open office? Should it be not an open office? Yeah, and that's, I've been in very interesting workspaces in the past as a developer in some roles as well, in various environments. I don't think I can. I mean, you can comment on what you like best, maybe what works for your team, but I wouldn't take this and go back to your office and try and change how everyone works in the workspace. I think it's really a communications effort, with your team and organization, and something that could change over time, something that can change per department, something can change maybe on a project basis. So I also don't think of it as a black and white issue either.
Yeah, and well, as the DevOps handbook tells us, if you get a project team that's working on something specifically where it really is a full DevOps group of operations, security, and developers,
Yeah.
putting them together in the same space that is segregated in some way from
Yes.
the rest of the organization actually works really well. So I think that it might even just be a matter of scale, right? Like, how big is your open concept office? Is it Facebook, or is it like, 4 different rooms with 4 different teams? That could be, an entirely different discussion in and of itself. But with that, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us this week for another episode of Application Security Weekly. Remember to git commit and stay classy.